Welcome back to True Crime in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm your host, Alexis Knight, and today we are going to dive into a case that leaves us questioning the boundaries of madness and evil. Richard Chase, also known as the Vampire of Sacramento. Have you heard of him? Heard of his case? Here's the question for you. Can someone be so consumed by their own delusions that they lose all sense of reality? Or is there a point where madness and malice become indistinguishable? Richard Chase, he was a man whose crimes shocked a city, and they still haunt true crime enthusiasts to this day. His acts were horrifying, but the debate rages on. Was Chase truly insane, a victim of his mind's darkest corners? Or did he know exactly what he was doing? Was he, in fact, evil? This case brings us to the crossroads of mental illness and criminal intent. As we unpack the story of Richard Chase, I invite you to consider: when does insanity excuse a crime, and when does it simply explain it? Was Chase a man trapped in a delusional nightmare, or was he a cold-blooded killer hiding behind the veil of madness? Keep on listening, and let's find out. Let's take a look at some of the facts. Now that we've set the stage with our big question, let's look at the facts of this case. The who, the what, and the how that brought Richard Chase to the forefront of public fear and debate. Richard Chase was born in 1950, and from a young age there were signs that something was wrong. As a teenager, he began to exhibit behaviors, and they were more than just troubling, they were alarming. He was deeply withdrawn, struggled with substance abuse, and showed early signs of a mental breakdown. His obsession with his health escalated quickly, and he believed his organs were dissolving, and that his heart was shrinking, and that his blood was turning to dust. By his early 20s, Chase had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. But despite this diagnosis, he resisted treatment, sinking deeper into his own delusional world. By the mid-1970s, Richard Chase's delusions were becoming more violent. He believed that drinking blood was the only way to keep himself alive, starting with small animals he caught and killed. In 1976, after an incident where he injected himself with rabbit blood, Chase was committed to a psychiatric hospital. There, his behavior was so bizarre that staff nicknamed him Dracula. He spoke endlessly about his need for blood and claimed that his heart had stopped beating. Despite this, after only a year of confinement, he was deemed no longer a threat to himself or to anyone else, and he was released to his mother's care. However, the real trouble began when his mother decided to wean him off of his meds. She believed he just didn't need them. Freed from both institutional care and the meds, Chase's paranoia spiraled out of control. He began stalking neighborhoods, searching for victims. On December 29th in 1977, Richard Chase struck for the first time. In a random drive-by shooting, he killed 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin as the man was helping his wife carry groceries into their home. It was senseless, and it was just a terrifying act of violence, and the city of Sacramento had no idea that this would be only the beginning. By January of 1978, Chase's bloodlust had intensified. He broke into the home of Teresa Wallen, a pregnant woman, brutally murdering her and performing horrific acts on her body. Less than 2 weeks later, he struck again, entering the home of Evelyn Maroth. This time, he killed 4 people, including a 6-year-old boy and a 22-month-old baby. The crime scenes were beyond comprehension. They were filled with blood and evidence of unspeakable acts. The randomness, the savagery of his crimes, it all left the public in a state of complete fear. Law enforcement realized they were dealing with a killer who did not follow any recognizable pattern or motive. They had to act quickly, and within days, a massive manhunt was underway. When they finally captured Chase, the city breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the questions still did remain. Who was this man? And why did he commit such unspeakable acts? Richard Chase's crimes shocked Sacramento and the world. But was he driven by pure madness? Or was there something far more sinister beneath the surface? The facts of the case were horrifying. But as you'll see, the courtroom would become the next battleground to determine whether Richard Chase was mad or simply bad. And so we enter the courtroom, where the fate of Richard Chase would be determined. Here, the lines between madness and evil would blur, and the debate over justice would come to a head. This was not a simple case. It was a legal and moral quandary that would challenge everyone involved, from the jury to the public. On one side, you have Chase's defense. And the defense team argued that he was a paranoid schizophrenic, and he was suffering from severe delusions. Suffering and unable to control his actions or understand the consequences. They brought in psychiatric experts who testified that Chase's brain was like a broken machine caught in a relentless cycle of fear and confusion. They described in detail how Chase believed his blood was turning into dust and his organs were dissolving, and that consuming blood was his only chance of survival. The experts recounted his history: multiple hospitalizations, documented psychotic episodes, and a clear diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. To them, these were signs of a man lost to his mental illness, and a man who needed medical help, not punishment. It all seems to make sense. But there is the other side, and here is where things start to get complicated. The prosecution was not convinced of all of this. They presented their own experts who argued that while Chase was mentally ill, he was definitely still aware enough to understand right from wrong. And they pointed out moments of planning and decision-making. He didn't want to get caught, for instance. He purchased a gun, and not impulsively, but with forethought. And he chose his victims randomly, but with specific intent to enter their homes and then commit violent acts. And he would know this ahead of time. He attempted to clean up after his crimes, discard evidence, and try to evade capture. All of these things suggest a level of consciousness and intent. The prosecution also highlighted how Chase's behavior did not always align with a complete detachment from reality. There were times that he made choices that showed he did understand the consequences of his actions, like fleeing from scenes where he would fear getting caught. They argued that he knew what he was doing and was very capable of making choices, even if these choices were driven by dark urges. I mean, yes, if you plan something out and you don't want to get caught, it definitely seems as though you know this is wrong and you just got to get it done. You want to get it done. But at the same time, if you are so deep in your delusion, and your delusion includes a world that doesn't understand you, your actions inside your delusions would also be something that you would want to protect, and you would not want to get caught and have someone take that from you. So it gets ugly, it gets deep. What happens inside of a delusion like the ones he was experiencing, and how deep do they go with our real hardcore choices of what is reality and what is not, what is good, what is bad, and things like this. And because it is so twisty, the public never can agree, and people do take very strong sides here. And even as you think to yourself, what kind of choice would you make here if you were pressed to commit? I mean, think about this. Can someone be so deeply trapped in delusion, yet still make conscious, calculated decisions? The jury had to wrestle with this dilemma as they considered both sides' arguments. The defense's closing argument was a plea for understanding. They argued that Richard Chase was a tragic figure, not an evil one. They pointed out that he had been released from psychiatric care prematurely with inadequate support, and that his crimes were the result of a system failing a person who desperately needed help. The defense asked the jury to consider what it means to be mentally ill in a society that doesn't always provide the necessary safety nets. But now, in response, the prosecution urged the jury to focus on the brutality and the premeditation of Chase's actions. They argued that even a man with severe mental illness must be held accountable if he is aware enough to choose to commit crimes. They painted Chase not as a victim, but as a predator who used his illness as a shield for his evil deeds. This jury's decision was not an easy one. They deliberated for hours, weighing the evidence, the testimonies, and the arguments from both sides. Was Richard Chase a man completely detached from reality? Or was he a dangerous killer who knew exactly what he was doing? Well, finally, they returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts of first-degree murder. Chase was sentenced to death, a decision that would ignite debates across the country about justice and mental illness and that fine line between madness and malice. But did this verdict truly settle the matter? We're going to talk about this a bit more. I mean, this controversy didn't end with the judge's gavel. It only grew in all reality. It was fueled by differing perspectives on what constitutes insanity, justice, and accountability in the most extreme circumstances. With this case, even with a guilty verdict and a death sentence, the story of Richard Chase didn't end there. In fact, the controversy around this case has only grown over time. So why does this case still resonate decades later? Why does it continue to spark debate and divide opinions? Because that's what it's doing here on this podcast. We're trying to figure out if we can have a solid opinion. Now, first, let's consider the divided public reaction. On one hand, many people believed that Chase was a clear-cut case of evil. He was a man who chose to commit unspeakable acts and deserved the harshest punishment available. For these people, the horrors of his crimes, the brutality, the randomness, the sheer disregard for human life outweighed any argument about his mental state. They argued that to excuse Chase's actions as insanity would be an insult to the victims and their families, who were left with a lifetime of pain. But there was that other side. For others, Chase was a tragic figure, a man who had been failed by a broken mental health system. They saw him not as a monster, but as a victim of his own mind, lost in a world of delusions and paranoia that he could not escape from. They argued that he was a man who needed help, not punishment, and that society had failed in its duty to protect both him and the people he would ultimately harm. For them, Chase's story was a cautionary tale about the dangers of neglecting mental health care and the consequences of releasing a clearly disturbed individual out into the world without adequate support or treatment. Now, let's think about this, guys. How do you judge a case like this? When you hear words like schizophrenia and psychosis, does your perspective shift? Does understanding the depth of his delusions change your view on whether he should have been held accountable in the same way as someone without such a condition? The media, that also played a significant role in shaping public opinion. Headlines like "The Vampire of Sacramento," that's a big one. It painted Richard Chase as a terrifying villain, a predator lurking in the shadows, striking fear into the hearts of a city. His crimes were sensationalized, the details splashed across newspapers, creating an image of a man who was not just disturbed, but diabolical. This portrayal influenced how the public viewed the case and the discussion around his sanity and responsibility. But the debate was not limited to the public or the media. The legal community was also divided. Some in the legal community saw Chase his case as a failure of the insanity defense, a defense meant to protect those who cannot understand their actions or control their behavior due to a severe mental illness. And others believed that the defense had been overused and that Chase's conviction was a necessary correction, ensuring that those who commit heinous acts face justice regardless of their mental state. The case also raised broader questions about the nature of criminal responsibility. Should someone with a diagnosed mental illness be held to the same standards as a person without such a diagnosis? And what does it mean to be insane in the eyes of the law anyway? What does it mean? Is it enough to have a documented illness? Or does the law require proof that the person was entirely unaware of their actions or unable to control them? And this brings us to the heart of the controversy. What is justice in a case like this? Is it about punishment? Or is it about understanding and treating the root causes of criminal behavior? When we talk about justice, are we talking about retribution, rehabilitation, or maybe something in between? As time has passed, this debate continues. Richard Chase died by suicide in prison in 1980, just 2 years after his conviction, and his death only added more layers to the controversy. Some saw this as an admission of guilt, and others saw it as the final tragic chapter in the story of a man who was profoundly mentally ill. The case remains a topic of discussion in law schools today, criminal justice courses, and among true crime enthusiasts like yourselves who continue to ask, was this a man who could not be helped? Or was he a man who could not be forgiven? So you have to ask yourself, what do you think? Was the jury's verdict the right call here? Or did they miss something crucial? Was justice truly served, or was this just another example of how our legal system struggles to handle cases that just don't fit neatly into black and white categories? I invite you to make your choice. And even as you debate this amongst yourselves, you will still find reasons why you just can't commit to one side or the other. It's typically how it goes. But all right, we have walked through the chilling facts, we've examined the arguments, and we've highlighted the controversy surrounding Richard Chase. Now, it really is your turn to step into that jury box of public opinion. Was Richard Chase a man so mentally ill that he lost all grasp on reality? Or was he a calculating killer who knew exactly what he was doing? Hey, can someone be both mad and bad? And if so, where does that leave us when it comes to justice? Where do they fall? Reflect on what you've heard today. What do you think the legal system got right? Where might it have gone wrong? When it comes to cases like this, do we truly understand what justice should look like? And that's a wrap for this case today, guys. Thank you for joining me in the court of public opinion. Remember, justice is a conversation that never truly ends. Keep questioning, keep debating, and until next time, this is Alexis Knight.